I was a sheltered kid. Never had a lot of freedom, really. Hell, I wasn't even allowed to go to the bathroom by myself until I was 8. It wasn't really my parents' fault, though. Before I was born, they had another kid, Jacob. They loved him a lot, even more than myself, I remember thinking as a kid. One day, I guess they weren't careful enough and Jacob ended up going missing. He was only 9 years old. He simply left, never to be seen again. They gave up looking for him after 7 months, and a year later they got pregnant with me. They never found his body, so I think a little part of them always hoped that he was alive. I never met him, but I remember ever since I was little, I had felt this weird connection to him. My parents used to tell me that I'd scare the hell out of them when I was younger because I kept on talking to this one corner in the closet. Whenever they'd ask me who I was talking to, I would just say Big Brother. Keep in mind, I was younger than 3 when this had happened. They hadn't told me about him, and there was no way I could have known otherwise. I do remember he was a part of my life. Maybe it was some sort of subconscious trauma response to having overprotective parents, but I could have sworn he was always there, hovering over me. The first time I remember him talking to me was when I was around 5. I was coloring some picture in the playroom, and Jacob was talking to me. "What are you drawing?" he asked me. He tugged on my braids. I remember he did that a lot. "It's a forest, with fairies and rainbow and a baby deer," I said proudly, holding it up to him. He scoffed. "That doesn't even look like a real forest. To draw nature, you gotta be in nature. Here, come with me." He took my wrist in his cold, icy hand and practically dragged me outside. He handed me a little shovel I used to help Mom in the garden. "Dig right here," he told me. And I obliged. I found the usual bugs, rocks, fruits, but I also dug up something else. And Jacob smiled as I pulled it out of the ground. It was a backpack. I think it used to be red. It felt heavy, and there was definitely something in it, but the zipper was so rusted I couldn't get it open. "That's alright," Jacob shrugged. "We'll get it later." "Lily?" I heard my mother's panicked voice call. "Lily!" She saw me outside, and Jacob quickly took the bag from me and pushed me away. "Oh my goodness, don't run off like that alone." "I wasn't alone," I protested. Looking back to see, nothing. Jacob had disappeared. My mom dragged me back inside by the color of my dress and put me in my room. "Do not leave here. You mustn't go outside like that. Stay safe." I never really liked my bedroom. Something about it was just off. Even to me as a little kid, I never felt entirely alone, and there was a certain amount of bad energy that I could just feel. I especially hated the closet. Whenever I would change clothes, I'd shut my eyes, fish around until found something. I didn't care if it was ugly. I just wanted to get out of the closet as soon as I could. All of that energy that was in the room felt like it was smothering me in there. Suddenly, Jacob appeared behind me. I jumped. He looked where I had been staring, right at the closet. "Scared of that thing, huh, little sis?" he asked, and I nodded shakily. He glanced at me and then back at the closet. "Sometimes you need to face your fears." He very slowly paced towards the closet and then opened it in one swift movement. He motioned for me to come over. I, believing everything my big brother told me, inched towards him. "Go in." I shut my eyes and stepped in, and to my surprise, he shut the door behind me, leaving me in the scary dark closet alone. I cried for him, but he didn't respond. I curled into a little ball and cried into my knees. The feeling of dread was overpowering me. I felt so alone. He was too quiet, not a good, peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet that you can feel in your bones, like there was someone else in the closet with me, watching me. To comfort myself, I tapped on the closet walls. One section I had noticed sounded different than the other part of the wall, like it was hollow. I never really liked that corner of the closet. It was the scariest part, after all. Eventually, my mom called me for dinner, and I worked up the courage to get up and open the door. Jacob wasn't there. Nobody was. That night, my parents told me to not speak about Jacob ever again. That stopped me for a while. I honestly don't remember a lot up until I was 8. I don't know if this is the first time I had spoken to him since the closet incident, but it's the most significant. This time, he took me to Dad's work computer and showed me all the fun games to play. But after a while, he told me to stop playing the silly games and start Googling things. Being a sheltered kid, I didn't even know what Google was. He told me, Google Jacob Holden. That's you, I remember saying. I clicked on the first article I found. Jacob Holden, age 9, went missing from his Colorado home on March 12, 2003. He leaves without a trace, the only thing missing from his room being his school backpack. Authorities have tried to reach out to his parents, Jennifer and Carl Holden, to no avail. He was not seen leaving the house and was not seen by anybody after he left the school. School backpack? I said. Like the one we found together? Without a word, he handed me the old rusted-off backpack. He then handed me a pair of scissors. Cut it open, Lily, please. I obliged, and inside, in the backpack I had found years ago, was everything. Jacob Holden passport, Jacob Holden birth certificate, anything that could have been identified him was in that bag. Why was it buried in our backyard? I began thinking about everything. Mom and Dad almost never let me outside alone. The backpack was buried outside with everything in it. Mom and Dad apparently never talked to the police, even though they had told me they searched for months. Jacob was never seen leaving the house. The hollow wall in my closet. I guess Jacob had realized I had known what was up, because he presented me with something, a large sledgehammer. Go to the closet, Lily. You know what to do. With tears in my eyes, I took the sledgehammer from him and ran to my closet. I went, shaking, to the door that held my biggest fear for so long, now knowing that it was true the whole time. I found the hollow corner and let the sledgehammer loose on it. Something they don't tell you about dead bodies is if they're trapped in an airtight space, such as a wall, they don't really decompose. They more like just dry up like meat in a dry aging fridge. Jacob's official cause of death was starvation. He was still alive when they put him in there. I didn't ever see Mom and Dad after that. Police took me to the live with my aunt. I never saw Jacob either. I missed him. The last time I saw him, I was in the back of a police car, being taken to a foster home until they could find a relative who would take me in. I looked back at my house, my window, to see Jacob. He was staring at me, blankly. He waved goodbye at me, and I gave him a smile. Maybe he could never leave that place, but he made sure that I could. And he was one hell of a brother, after all. Upon my father and I moving into our new house, I was searching around the attic, as we were going to clear it out and make it my new room. I really enjoyed the idea of having this attic as a bedroom. I would have 2 windows, one in the front and one other one in the back. So I would be able to look down over the entire front and backyard in just a few steps. I know this isn't something most people would be necessarily excited for, but I was 13 and I thought that was pretty cool. I examined the uncleared room, imagining where I would keep all my furniture, but that was kind of difficult to do with all the boxes and debris in the way. It was a small rural home in Colorado that had been abandoned for some reason many years prior. While my father was occupied moving our old furniture in from the moving truck, I opted to begin cleaning out the attic. After all, I was a teenager now. I could absolutely clean out the entire thing by myself. I was wrong. I decided I would get all the boxes down and emptied out first before getting my dad to help me move the old shelves and such. I began excitedly rifling through the boxes to see if there was anything worth keeping, like old Pokemon cards or something. To my dismay, none of it was really interesting, mostly just seasonal decorations. I had gone through nearly every box in about an hour when something finally caught my eye. A tape. It was extremely dusty, and whatever was written on it had been scribbled out. I imagined it must be something spooky, and thought I would watch it when we got my room set up. I tucked it into my bag with all of my personal belongings and made my way down to help my dad finish. After a few days living there, I was able to deduct that something felt strange about the house. I liked my room though, So I was being optimistic about it. The age of the house became apparent, with the chipped and scratched paint covering the walls, and the structure settled frequently. I believed I could get used to it though. The worn paint, while a noticeable flaw, seemed to be an easy fix through a simple application of fresh coats. I had entirely forgotten about the tape at this point, as I was more focused on helping my dad tidy up the downstairs areas. It was a cheap home, and given that it was abandoned and had a lot of furniture in it, I never understood why the previous owners would abandon the home without any of their belongings. After about a week and a half of cleaning and moving the downstairs, it's finally looking like a sustainable living area. Now it was time for my room, in which my father told me we would work on the next day. I was just kind of upset about this, but understood. We'd been working for almost 2 weeks. We didn't have a lot of money, so we just cleared everything out on our own. Those freshly painted walls would more than likely to have wait a while. The next day we finished preparing my room, and I began getting my books, DVDs, and games out of the boxes. I sat the tape on my bookshelf with everything else, not thinking much about it yet. I was more excited to take a break and finally play on my Xbox again. And so came my first night sleeping in my new bedroom. My bed had been placed next to a window near the front of the house. I was enjoying being able to look down at the cars driving on by on the highway, identifying which of them had mean faces and which of them had nice faces. On the other side of the road was another house, a much nicer one than ours. Of course, it was also probably the only other house for a few miles. I could tell someone lived there, and there were strangely 2 cars parked outside it. I could tell someone lived there, and there were 2 cars parked outside of it. I just hadn't ever seen anyone come up to this point. That was strange to me as well, but I brushed it off as nothing. This was around the time of COVID-19 was dying down, but quarantine still lasted 2 weeks, so that was more likely the cause. I stopped thinking about it for the night and continued to judge the cars until I fell asleep. The next day, I awoke to the smell of bacon and quickly made my way downstairs. I loved bacon. My dad would cook it every Saturday morning, and we would always eat it and watch TV together as a family when my mom was still alive. We kept up the tradition even until now, and he and I would watch whatever cartoons were there in the morning. Hey kiddo, you sleep alright? His smile radiated towards me. Yeah, I really like my new room. I matched his smile with an even bigger one. I loved my dad. He was a really great guy. While I didn't share most of his outdoorsy interests, we were both big nerds. Before he moved, he would take me out to the theater every month or so to watch remasters of old horror films. I thought maybe at this time I should tell him about the tape, but I decided not to. I was very intrigued by it, but I didn't think he would want me to watch a mysterious tape. Reasonably so in my opinion, but I was very eager. I would just have to wait for him to leave the house for a prolonged amount of time so I could get the VR from his closet. So I could go get the VCR from his closet. I had no idea when the day would come, but I was excited. What you thinking about, bud? I was clearly deep in thought. I didn't mean to make it so obvious. Oh, nothing. I'm sorry. I was just concentrated on the TV. I lied. He nodded, putting another piece of bacon into his mouth. Have you met the neighbors yet? He said, slightly muffled by his hand while he chewed on his bacon. No, I haven't even been sure anyone actually lives there. I haven't seen anyone out in a couple weeks. Well, why don't me and you go introduce ourselves after breakfast? Maybe they'll have a kid your age. Okay, yeah, that sounds pretty great actually. This filled me with hope. I had a few friends growing up, just never any close ones. I was always considered extremely optimistic and warm. However, I was anything but an extrovert. A neighboring child my age would be the perfect candidate for a new friend. This could be a new fresh start. An hour passed. We both took showers and got dressed presentably and made our way across the road with a large plate of leftover bacon. I stood behind my father as he knocked on the door. We heard footsteps from inside getting closer until the door eventually opened. Hello? The man pushed the door open to a crack while my father introduced us. Hello, I'm Martin and this is my son, Ezra. We're your new neighbors. He held the plate out smiling. The man pushed the door open with an equally polite smile. "Oh, nice to meet you. I'm Marvin." He was a short, stubby man. He had a big, bushy mustache, and his head seemed to be balding. There was a sign behind him on their wall that read Ellsworth, and I assumed that was his last name. I stuck up my hand shyly in a wave. He looked over my father's shoulder at me. "Hello, Ezra. I'm Mr. Ellsworth. It's very nice to meet you." This confirmed my theory about his last name. He stuck out his hand and prompting me to shake it. "Nice to meet you too." I shook his hand. It felt very calloused. Then a woman appeared behind the man, similar in appearance. "Oh, and this is my wife, Harriet. Come in, come in." He waved his arms inwards, encouraging us to enter. We followed. My father placed a plate of bacon on their kitchen table, and conversation between the three of them ensued. I didn't contribute anything to the conversation, nor did I mean to stare, but I did. Eventually, a girl entered the kitchen. She looked to be my age. I got excited, but still said nothing until Mr. Ellsworth broke my silence. "This is my daughter, Gia. Why don't you go show our guests around the house?" Gia agreed, and I started following her up the stairs. She was very pretty. She had long blonde hair and blue eyes, nothing like either of her parents. They both had black hair, and I couldn't manage to break the silence. I didn't exactly know what to say. I was nervous. We continued walking until we reached her room. She sat on her bed, while I stood awkwardly beside the door, still silent. I was messing it up, and I knew it. It felt awful. She broke the silence. "So, what's your name?" she asked, just curiously. "I'm Ezra. I moved here from Wisconsin." "What made you move all the way out here? It's really far." Seemed like she was having a hard time speaking to me, the same way I was with her. "It was just cheap. We aren't the most financially stable family. What kind of other things do you do for fun around here?" I was attempting to break the awkwardness. She began to list off her hobbies. We actually had a lot in common. We shared a favorite movie, Saw. We began talking and laughing together as if we had been friends for our entire lives. It felt like hours had gone by when Mr. Ellsworth and my father walked up the stairs and informed me it was time to head back to home. It had only been 30 minutes. I waved goodbye to her with a smile, and she reciprocated. I was very happy. I made a friend. About a week had gone by. Gia and I were hanging out frequently now, both at my house and hers. My dad had gotten a job. It was still summer. Things were great. When I was with Gia, I had entirely forgotten about the tape. I had a crush on her at this point. Although we were young, I knew I liked her a lot. I think my dad picked up on this. He would tease me pretty often about it. Gia ended up going on a family vacation the following week. They'd gone for a few days. This is when things began to become increasingly strange. One night, I had woken up to the sound of the house settling, and it just wouldn't really stop for a few seconds. This wasn't even weird. What I heard was something totally else. Footsteps. I originally brushed this off and tilted over trying to go back to sleep, but then something caught my attention. It wasn't just one footstep. I heard this going on for about 15 minutes until it eventually stopped. I thought I had just imagined it, and I fell back asleep. It was a warm Friday morning. I woke up expecting to hear my dad walking around, but there was nothing. He was probably watching TV. I got up and walked to the downstairs. There was a note on the table. I quickly realized he wasn't home, so I decided to read the note. It said, "Hey kiddo, sorry I left so abruptly. I didn't want to wake you up. I had to leave early. I got called in for a very short notice business trip. There's plenty of food in the fridge, so keep yourself well fed while I'm gone. Mr. Ellsworth has offered to burn some of those leftover boxes and furniture from when we first moved. So please set them out front for him to collect when his family gets back home. I love you, Dad." I was kind of sad that I didn't get to see him before he left, but it was okay. I could manage. I went out and started moving our boxes from the garage to the front yard. After about halfway going through, I remembered the tape suddenly. This made my work rate increasingly quick, as I knew I could watch the tape without being caught now. I'd completely forgotten about it. My curiosity peaked again. When I got inside, I basically sprinted from my dad's room and grabbed a VCR from his slot. Went upstairs and plugged it onto my TV. I picked up the dusty tape from the bookshelf and blew off any dust before carefully pushing it into the VCR. The tape began rolling, and I became increasingly disappointed as I realized it was just footage of someone walking through the woods for what seemed to be 5 minutes. The person filming was whispering something, but it sounded like gibberish. Towards the end of the tape, whoever was recording the tape's pace sped up, and a building came into the frame as the tape ended, but it was too blurry to make out exactly where it was. It was pretty weird. It just didn't meet any of the expectation of a spooky tape. I just kept watching the tape over for the next course of days. I was just still curious as to what it was on the tape. I was failing to make any type of connection. So, I gave up. Everything was pretty normal, other than the tape. A few days passed. I saw a vehicle pulled into the Ellsworth driveway. They were home. I finally had someone to talk to again. Gia was home. But first, I had to assist Mr. Ellsworth with transporting the boxes over to his backyard so he could burn them. This took a long time, but eventually we got it done. Before I knew it, it was 9 p.m. Didn't have time to talk to Gia today, even if I wanted to. So I just thanked Mr. Ellsworth, told him good night, and went back home. My dad would be home in a few days, and I was pretty happy about that. Except, he never returned. A day became 2, and 2 days became 3, and I was so increasingly worried. I had stopped talking to Gia because I was so anxious. Then something came in the mail for me. I hoped it was a letter. I didn't have a phone with service, so this was the only way I'd be able to communicate with Dad. It wasn't. It was just another tape. Didn't even want to watch it. I was still too concerned about my dad. This tape was also scribbled out and looked pretty old. My curiosity finally got the best of me, and I put the tape in, began to roll. A man walked into the frame this time. He sat down at a table. Then I realized this was my house. The man, very distressed, began to speak. If you manage to get a hold of this tape, you need to get out of this house. People across the street, they kill people. They mutilate them and do horrible things with the parts. I'm about to contact authorities as soon as I finish the recording. While my mom was over to visit, she mysteriously disappeared, and I never knew why. He paused for about 15 seconds and took a deep breath. I was over at their house a couple hours ago. I was looking for them because they had gone downstairs. I was just going to let them know that I was about to leave, and I found a finger while I was down there. It had my mother's wedding ring. There were several boxes. They know. They have been trying to scare me before they kill me. They're making me record this to play with me before they kill me. He broke into tears. A much younger Mr. Ellsworth walked into the frame behind the man, and the tape ended. I was horrified. I didn't know what to do. Was this why my dad hadn't arrived home? Boxes? Like the boxes my father had asked me to give Mr. Ellsworth in his letter? The footsteps I heard a couple of weeks ago that I brushed off as nothing? The first tape? Was the building I saw in the first tape was this house too? What about Gia? Does she know? I was thrown into a full panic. I knew I had to get out of the house and run to the next house as soon as I possible. I turned around to begin leaving, but then I froze. I saw him. Right out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. He was in my wardrobe, staring at me wide-eyed through the crack of the door. It was Mr. Ellsworth.